Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining America's Promise Alliance and the Gradnation campaign. We will begin shortly. Welcome to the Gradnation campaign's webinar, Achieving a 90% Graduation Rate, Unlocking the Untapped Potential of Caring Adult Relationships. Before we begin, we want to note a few ground rules. Due to the volume of participants today, everyone has been muted. At any time during the presentation, you can use the questions panel to write and submit your questions. We will try to take as many questions as possible following the presentation. We invite you to join the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag Gradnation during and after the presentation. This webinar is being recorded. A link will be shared in the coming days on the Gradnation website, along with the webinar slides as well. Finally, we encourage all participants to take a 2 to 3 minute survey immediately following today's webinar. This survey information will help us better understand who you are, whether this webinar was valuable to you and your work, and what topics you'd like to see covered during future Gradnation learning sessions. We will now get started and the recording will begin. Welcome to today's webinar, where we will explore lessons from communities, researchers, and a young person on how to sustainably increase the number and quality of caring adults and the impact of these relationships on a student's life. I am Nevatia Noble, an Associate of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships at America's Promise Alliance. For the first part of today's webinar, America's Promise Alliance is joined by experts Dr. Shannon Varga, Doctoral Research Fellow at the Center for Promise, who will provide us with a deeper understanding of the research base and relevant frameworks that synthesize how caring adult relationships serve as a developmental support for all students. Alexis Creamer, our youth trustee, who will be discussing the impact of caring adults in her life in high school and through college. Michael Huang, Vice President for National Resource Center and Connections at Communities and Schools, who will discuss the role of site coordinators as caring adults in schools they work in and their approach in developing these relationships. The second half of the Gradnation webinar will delve more deeply into Colorado's focus on increasing the number of caring adult relationships in the school through their Colorado School Counselor Core Grant Program. We will be learning more about the program from Eve Pugh, Colorado School Counselor Coordinator at the Colorado Department of Education, Dr. Rhonda Hannaford, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Schools for the Greeley-Evans-Weld County District 6, and Christina Cloyd, Lead Counselor at Greeley Central High School. America's Promise Alliance has led the Gradnation campaign for nearly 10 years. In that time, we have seen the graduation rate climb from the 70s to a 2016 rate of 84.1%. Our action platform aims to get at the practices that contribute to an increasing graduation rate by reflecting the experiences and expertise of nonprofit, school districts, classroom leaders, who are all working to improve graduation and life outcomes for all young people. The Caring Adult Relationships platform area reflects the importance of having positive caring adult relationships and the types of support that these relationships can provide students and contribute to overall success. It is evident that mentorship is a great way to increase graduation rates and help change student outcomes. But there are other types of caring adults as well, such as school nurses, school counselors, site coordinators, teachers, and that's just to name a few. In today's webinar, we will hear how a national organization, CIS, is using site coordinators to increase caring adult relationships and learn from a panel of Colorado stakeholders engaged in efforts to sustainably increase school counselors in schools. To get us started, I'll turn things over to Dr. Shannon Varga, a researcher from our Center for Promise.
Thank you, Navesha, and hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in. I'm going to give you a brief introduction into what our research at the Center for Promise and what research in general has told us about relationships. Relationships are the foundation upon which all youth development rests. Youth develop their identities and gain all the necessary social supports and social capital that they need to be successful in life through interactions with various adults, peers, institutions, and environments. And if you think about your own lives, every step forward you made was through a relationship with a person, an institution, or an environment. And the research backs this up. Research, as Navesha pointed out, has consistently shown that relationships with caring adults are associated with positive academic, behavioral, and psychological outcomes, as well as reductions in negative behaviors like substance abuse. To that end, we know a lot about what optimal dyadic or one-to-one relationships should look like, such as mentoring relationships, parent-child relationships, and student-teacher relationships. Yet we know very little about how these adults work together or impact one another in supporting young people. So for example, Dr. Renee Spencer from Boston University School of Social Work found in a study of parents' role in mentoring relationships that parents would either help or hinder the mentoring relationship based on how connected they felt to the mentor. And you can imagine that this is a pretty common phenomenon, but how much of mentor training is really about considering the perspective of parents? Very little. In addition, we know very little about non-traditional role adults that might be important sources of support for young people, as Navesha mentioned. So some that we've heard in our research have been bus drivers or custodians. And so the disconnect between what research is focused on and who youth are actually turning to suggests that there could be untapped, unidentified sources of support everywhere. And so given how important caring adult relationships are for young people, it's imperative that we fully understand them so that we know how to effectively support young people. There are also many different resources exchanged in youth-adult relationships, and so I just wanted to briefly define some of these to give us more specific language to talk about the kinds of support that young people need. But there's a lot more about this in the Webs of Support brief, which we can send out after. So all youth need informational support, which refers to providing advice or guidance on any topic of interest to the young person. They also need instrumental support, which refers to practical support, such as giving a young person a ride or helping them fill out applications, whether it be work, college, or anything. Emotional support is what most people think of when they think of social support, and it refers to having a space where youth feel their concerns are heard, they are cared for, and accepted. Affirmation refers to providing constructive feedback about how the young person is doing. In terms of social capital, there is the bridging side of social capital, which refers to connecting young people to new networks or new information. And this is what most people think of when they think of social capital. It's not what you know, it's who you know. But there's also bonding social capital, which is a relational product that exists between people of shared identities. And shared identities can be very macro, such as a racial group or religion, or very micro, like you're in the same book club. And so bonding social capital is really useful for building trust and mutuality, which is why you might see this term in studies of civic engagement. You can see that all of these resources might be very important for very different situations for young people, and that combinations of them can be very powerful. But just like with relationships, we don't often consider all of the supports that young people is getting from different people in their lives, and it limits our understanding of how to support people. Think about the types of support you're providing to young people in your life. I don't know what's happening with the slides. Oh, here we go. Okay. So therefore, at the center, we collapse social support, social network, and social capital literature to create this webs of support frame. And if I could just have the control here to press next. Thank you. Okay, so we collapsed all of these different literatures to create the webs of support framework to represent how relationships and resources optimally operate to promote more accurate examinations of how adolescents gain the developmental supports necessary to thrive. And so just to quickly walk you through the framework, youth are located in the center of the framework. All of the circles represent different actors or adults and peers that provide support. Generally, youth will have strong ties or people who provide the most support in each setting. And so these are represented by the teal circles. And these are the people that young people turn to first. They're the first person they think of when they have a problem. Then young people will have weaker ties, which are represented by the orange circles. And here we'll have an adult who has maybe provided support in the past, but isn't seen as a main or regular source of support. And so here you might have a teacher from last year. Importantly, these people can later become strong ties. And finally, the circles that aren't filled in and have dotted lines connecting to them represent potential ties that caring adults can introduce youth to. So first, this is a tool for visualizing and thinking about relationships. If there's a young person you're concerned about, think about where you might be on their map. Are you a strong tie or are you a weak tie? Are there potential ties that you have that could help support your young person? Does that young person have another person in their network who you might be able to leverage for support? These are all questions that this framework can help you to consider. Second, it's a tool for changing the way that we go about supporting young people. Our previous research and the literature has shown us that youth are active agents in their own development. Young people are capable of intentionally engaging or disengaging from relationships and resources. So it follows that they'd be active agents in building their own webs of support. Bring young people along as partners in this journey of supporting them. It's also shown us that all adults have the potential to provide at least one or more support for youth. This means that we all have a role to play. We need to move past this idea of a superhero or a magician because it's not scalable or sustainable and not realistically how young people are getting through life. Of course, adults can rise to the level of support that mentors give, but again, the research suggests that it can be more than one person if this isn't an option. So find your role in every young person's web. It's also shown us that interconnectivity among actors in the web is important for resilience. The more interconnected caring adults are, the more prepared they are to support young people through any changes in their webs or any transitions that the young people might face in their life, such as going to from middle school to high school. So make every connection that you can. And then finally, webs are dynamic and change over time depending on need. So this is an optimal web of a highly supported young person, but webs can look very different. And they also change over time depending on the developmental needs of a young person. So someone entering their first year versus their fourth year of high school might need very different support. So now let's move to an example of how this framework might be applied in real life. Let's take the case of school choice. Many of you will recognize school choice as a term to refer to programs which offer families the option to send their children to alternative schools, to the publicly funded neighborhood schools. An assumption here is that the school outside of the neighborhood has more resources. However, once you start to think about relationships as an essential resource, you might realize that this young person has a great emotionally affirming core of people at home that you're now removing her from to send to school. And further, there's no facilitated pathway for the parent to become more involved. And so now we've added a barrier to their involvement. And again, the literature suggests that parents' involvement is incredibly important to academic success. So there are many solutions to this issue from a web of support frame. One is that you don't remove the young person at all from their neighborhood school, but we know how popular school choice programs are, so that's probably not feasible. Another different solution would be to insert various supports to facilitate pathways between the home and school. And again, there are many other solutions that I encourage you all to think of some and start applying this frame to other scenarios. Webs of Support is ultimately about recognizing and leveraging the power of relationships to support young people. And given that the work from the Center for Promise and this framework was built from the voices of young people who shared their experiences with us, and we are dedicated to elevating youth voice to a national level, we wanted to hear from a young person. And so today I will be speaking to amazing young person, Alexis Creamer, who also happens to be an America Promise Alliance trustee.
Hello.
Oh, Alexis, who are the caring adults that have made the biggest impact on your ability to navigate your path to success?
So at the age of 12, I was really fortunate enough to be involved in the Wyman Teen Leadership Program, which is an org that empowers disadvantaged teens to be successful. So from 12, I've had camp counselors and various mentors that assisted me from middle school all the way up until post-secondary education. I mean, these adults were with me every single summer and even made visits to my high school to ensure that I was taking the needed steps to reach all of my goals. And I can honestly say that as a college senior today, they're still there to support me.
That's really great. So what do you think it takes for a caring adult relationship specifically to be effective? Like, what are the skills and capacities that you feel are important for a caring adult to possess?
Yeah, so I think in order for caring adult relationships to be effective, adults really need to encourage open dialogue and conversations. This is only one level, but I think that this is very vital in ensuring that a young person has a caring adult in their life. It literally has everything to do with that adult's willingness to be honest and have uncomfortable conversations with the young person. So they should talk about what's going on inside and outside of school. So yes, it's really important for caring adults to be open and non-judgmental, but they should also be firm and serve as a reliable figurehead.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And so what was the role that you played in creating these relationships?
As a young person, when I was facing a lot of adversities, it was really difficult to put my trust in someone I didn't know. So having said that, I believe my role in creating that relationship was really working on my own communication and being honest about my circumstance and the help that I really needed at home and at school. And now as a mentor that serves young people today, I see that my role is the same as my previous mentors, and that is reaching out and creating those platforms that make teens urge to talk about what's going on.
Could you give maybe an example of exactly how you worked on your communication? Like, what steps did you take?
Yeah, so I think that I just really tried to stay consistent. My mentors do a really good job of reaching out to me at any moment in the school year. And when I get backed up with things emotionally and academically, I just kind of tend to pull away. So I just made it my goal to make sure that I was connecting with all of these adults maybe once or twice a week and just keeping them updated as I would my mom or my sister about things that are going on so that I can get that advice and help that I need.
Thank you so much for sharing about the various different adults that have supported you throughout your life and about all of the work that you have done actively to maintain those relationships.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon and Alexis, for providing us with that foundation. It was great. We will now hear from Michael Huang from Communities in Schools.
Thank you, Navesha. I think I have control here. Great. All right. So first, I want to thank America's Promise for convening this dialogue about relationships. For 40 years, Communities in Schools has been working across the country to help students and families in need. And really building strong relationships has been a part of our DNA. In fact, our founder, Bill Milliken, drills it into sort of every staff member across the country, basically, that programs don't change children, relationships do. And it's with that mantra in mind that we've, as a network, worked for 40 years in evolving our practice and evolving our model. So with that in mind, here's what I'd like to share with you about what we've learned over the course of our organization's history. I'll talk a little bit about what CIS is and our model, our approach in understanding to building relationships, and how we're trying to learn even more about it. And then I'll close out this time with sort of some of the results of the students we work with. So starting with the students that we work with, let's see. Our mission at Communities in Schools is to surround students with a community of support, empowering them to stay in school and achieve in life. And so we case manage nearly 160,000 students across the country in 25 states in the District of Columbia, and we're organized into 133 affiliated state and local organizations. So to give you a sense of who we're serving, this snapshot really gives you a sense, like our students are students of color, 46% are Hispanic, Latino, 34% Black, and another key figure would be 93% of our students that we work with are eligible for free and reduced lunch. At the core of what we do is we put a highly skilled, trained professional into a school whose job is to sort of embed into that school, be a part of that culture, and help to identify academic and non-academic barriers that keep students from succeeding. I like to think of it as sort of like systems levels. They work and engage with school staff at a systems level, but they also build relationships with students on an individual level. And that's pretty key to sort of our model on how we work. Let's see, there we go. So here's our model laid out with the components and who's involved and what we do. And I offer it to kind of give you a sense of what CIS does. But today I'm going to focus on the case management portions, which to us is the building relationships with students portion. So while at the school level, we're working with the schools to develop a plan, identify needs, integrate and broker services, we do roughly a similar process on an individual level with students. Some of the things I want to call out, actually, I'm sorry, let me share some of the context of how our work is involved. In 2005, Communities in Schools completed an external evaluation that found that when the CIS model was implemented with fidelity, we lowered the dropout rates and increased promotion rates. So from those lessons, we codified that model that you saw in the previous slide and started to build out our professional development for our staff, onboarding support, and implementation standards to reflect more of what we've learned. And so some of those key pieces are, they start with our student needs assessment. It's critical that we have our affiliates at a local level develop a referral process that helps us identify the students who are most at need. There are systems we put in place like early warning indicators to use data to identify some of these students. But at CIS, all of our case managed students set at least one attendance, behavior, or course performance goal. And that's to make sure that we're engaging students, but with a sort of horizon in line and being very intentional with the work we're doing. We're also doing more work with them on social and emotional development in order to help them be ready to learn. So these numbers correspond to the components of the model from the model slide. And again, I wanted to drill down on the first piece around needs assessment and then this piece around monitoring and adjusting. Because I think monitoring and adjusting is critical, and it's one of those elements about of our relationship that is really about checking in, right? And what we know is a critical component to fidelity of the model is that we need to check in with our students. What we continue to try to find is the right dosage and the right frequency for how we check in. How long do we check in when we are doing a check-in? What makes a good check-in? And how frequently should we do that to make sure that we are connected with a student and get enough information to sort of interact and engage with them. So our model was great in setting the systems and templates in place to do our work. but our site coordinators were still working relatively, I'll say, intuitively on how to connect effectively with students. And what that means is like their ability to develop relationships, that was on their one-on-one level. And so we know we're making a difference in students' lives, but how are we doing that versus just being friendly? And so what you see here are the pieces that we think we need to learn more. On the right side of this continuum is what we hope to achieve: increased graduation rates, reduced dropout rates, post-secondary success, right? But on the left side are the foundational elements that we believe need to be placed in, starting with developmental relationships, social emotional development, and then setting goals around ABCs. So to that end, we've partnered with the Search Institute to help deepen our understanding and practice in building relationships with students. And here's a snapshot of what we've learned from the Search Institute. So we've learned that strong, positive relationships are critical across all parts of young people's lives, but too few students or young people experience a strong web of support. And that brings up to something presenters talked about earlier. It's not the fact that we need to be every web to everybody, but we do need a good understanding of that. And so what the Search Institute and Developmental Relationships helps us understand are these 5 critical elements of effective relationships: expressing care, challenging growth, providing support, sharing power, and expanding possibilities. What we did in a mini overview or exercise with some of our site coordinators at a local affiliate was we presented some of these items, and we've presented what it was that was so important about it. Alexis talked about that earlier in terms of sort of adults being firm and reliable, but also being opening and trusting. So when we shared this as sort of a self-reflective point, what our site coordinators got back to us and said was, you know what, we're probably very confident in our ability to express care, provide support, expand possibilities, but there's probably more work that we can do around challenging growth or sharing power. And that makes sense because we have a lot of folks who care and want to support and love our students, but there's so much to sort of be mindful of in strong relationships. And then also keeping in mind that we don't have to be every relationship element to every student. So that was one of the sort of mini lessons we worked as we tried to introduce these concepts and share that with more and more of our site coordinators to adapt into their work. Some of the other things that we are doing as a result of our understanding and learnings from the Search Institute is we're introducing these 5 elements as a way for site coordinators to reflect upon their relationships and our programming, what we're doing in schools, and the people we're brokering. So they're reflecting on their work more. We're also testing out opportunities to aggregate some survey information with the students that our site coordinators work with to help the site coordinators develop a snapshot of what their relationships are with students. It's not punitive, but it gives them a sense of whether there are any elements along the DR relationship or DR framework that they could focus more time on or be more intentional in brokering. It's another way to monitor and adjust and plan for new school years. And then finally, we're also finding ways to survey students and get a sense of their relationships, or rather their webs of support in their lives around them. And this gives us a more complete snapshot of what our students are working with, the families and communities that they come from, so that we are bringing the community together to help a student succeed and not sort of pretending like we can go it alone. So it speaks to our intentionality towards relationships, as well as the power of having a community of support around them. And just to close out, some of the outcomes for our case managed students are sort of laid out here for you all to see. Our students, 99% of the students we case manage stay in school. Again, 80% of them improve their attendance depending on their attendance goals. We've shown promising areas in academics, behavior, and then graduation and promotion rates. They are the lifeblood to our work, as well as the experts at informing how we develop our model moving forward. And so we have alumni programs, and we connect with our students in needs assessment processes to make sure they're empowered to shape our work more. That's an area that we're growing into, but that we hope will yield even more success. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Navisha.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that insightful presentation and basically telling us all about a model that we can all learn from. And also thank you, Shannon and Alexis, for the great presentations that you've done as well. Now we will be moving to the panel discussion with our Colorado colleagues, and then followed by a question and answer piece from our audience. So please don't forget to type in your questions in the questions panel so that we can ask them at the end of the presentations. As our Colorado colleagues turn on their webcams for panel discussions, please take a moment to ask any questions that you may have through the questions panel. Perfect. So it seems like you can see all of our participants for the second part of this webinar. So now that you can see them, you can see that we're joined by Eve Pugh from the Colorado School Counselor Coordinator from the Department of Education. We're also joined by Dr. Rhonda Hannaford, the Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Schools for the Greeley-Evans-Weld County District 6, and Christina Cloyd, Lead Counselor at Greeley Central High School. So to kick us off with the panelist section, Eve, can you describe what the Colorado School Counselor Program Fund is and how it began?
Certainly. Hello, and thank you for including us in this important work. We're really excited to be part of this panel and to share what's happening here in Colorado with you all. So the School Counselor Corps Grant Program is a state-funded competitive grant program, and the purpose of the grant is to increase the graduation rate, decrease the dropout, and actually increase the effective school counseling in schools that are funded throughout the state. We knew in Colorado that the graduation rate needed or could be increased, and so it started over 10 years ago, actually. Our governor, at the time, Governor Ritter, developed the P20 Council. These education experts were tasked with determining the best ways to increase the graduation rate, decrease that dropout, and they came up through research that school counselors can truly make a difference in that realm and success in schools. So from that, legislation was born, and it created the School Counselor Corps Grant Program. It's morphed and changed over a few years from $5 million now to $10 million, but that's how it started, and it really helps students into the next steps of career in college.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. I was just going to say, were you going with the next question, or should I just dive right in?
I can ask it just so everyone can know what we're asking. The second question is, what is the structure of the program? So like what systems and organizations are involved in making sure that this program continues and it's so sustainable?
Great, thank you. So the structure, it's a 4-year program. And again, as I mentioned, it's morphed and changed. It started out as a 3-year program, but a few years ago, it became a 4-year program. The development year became part of the process. And that first year is environmental scan, and we've heard about that, a needs analysis, a root cause analysis that each district or fundee is asked to perform to actually determine the deep needs of their schools and how the school counseling program can fit and make the changes that are really needed for student success. So that starts out in year 1. And then years 2, 3, and 4, we call them the implementation years. Those are fully funded. And what you can do with the funds is you can request up to $80,000 per school. Usually those funds are used for licensed school counselors' salary and benefits, along with any programming that they've identified in the development year that they would like to use to meet their goals that they've identified through, again, the development year. So the sustainability of it is truly what's been happening with school counselors being in the schools, implementing the ASCA model of that comprehensive school counseling and making a difference in student lives. And we hear it again of the why we're talking today actually is the caring adult. It doesn't have to be the school counselor, but often it is. And the school counselor can really help with those relationships in making success for students. So over the 8 years of data that we have seen a decrease in dropout in funded schools. Our graduation rate for funded schools has increased, and matriculation into post-secondary has also increased, which is truly what we're all about in helping students get to those next steps of success in career and college. Oh, yep, and there's a slide right down there below our pictures that talk about the goals of the grant, the decrease of student counselor ratio. Right now, we're still not, as a state, to the ASCA recommended of 250 to 1. However, we're getting closer, and our funded districts are at the recommended rate or below. And as you see, I have highlighted connecting students with a supportive adult, and it's truly making a difference, as we've seen from Michael and everybody we've talked to today.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Eve. So the next question we have is for Rhonda Hannaford, and she is the Assistant Superintendent for the Greeley School County District, and they actually received this grant. So we're going to ask that you can describe what the execution and implementation looks like once the school district has been selected.
Well, what we did is we started by hiring 8 amazing counselors, one at each of our 8 secondary schools, and Christy is one of them, who you'll get to hear from in a little bit. And Eve is right. We first did an environmental scan and an audit. We took a look at what our counselors were responsible for and how much time was dedicated in those areas. And then we looked at what themes were arising. Counselors have worked extremely hard, and at the same time, they also wanted to be able to make better and stronger connections with their students. And so when we designed our plan, we really wanted to make sure that what we were designing was going to be sustainable after the conclusion of this grant. And so hiring 8 counselors is great. And at the same time, how do we sustain that if our worst case scenario is we don't have the funding to sustain it? And so we designed a very thoughtful MTSS model that focused on interventions, and it was a framework looking at both academic and non-academic factors that were impacting students, and then being very strategic around what should all Tier 1 look like for our students at the secondary level, what are Tier 2 interventions, and then of course some Tier 3 interventions, but we really focused on Tier 1 and Tier 2. And we have a lead MTSS counselor at each of these 8 schools whose major job is not only to implement the intervention framework, but then to build the capacity of the other teachers who are a part of the MTSS team, and then those beyond it. Because just like as was shared earlier, it's not dependent upon one person. And we are most focused on building a sustainable system that every student would have that caring adult who would be monitoring what we call the ABCs, their attendance, behaviors, credits, grades, and that with that we would be able to intervene quickly. And so we formally meet with our MTSS leads at least once a month and talk about all sorts of things, how we're working towards meeting our goals, what struggles we're facing. We share resources and ideas with each other, and just celebrations. Sometimes we just need our own little connection with each other as the caring adult. So we're our own little MTSS model there too. And from that, schools have designed what makes the most sense for them. For instance, 2 of our middle schools have, every student has a mentor, and they meet with their mentor each week for at least 10 minutes. 10 minutes might not seem like a lot of time, but it does go a long way when you consistently do that each week, and the students set both personal and academic goals. That teacher is the one who reaches out to the parents. And at those two schools, the parents are actually contacting the teacher mentor first before they would go to an administrator or to a counselor for questions. And so that's a model that has been very effective in those two middle schools. Another middle school chose to make the caring relationship through home visits, and all of their staff members are doing home visits, and they work together with a partner. And so if there's a barrier for the family to come to the school, which oftentimes there is, they just decided, you know what, well, we're going to reach out to our parents and go to them and take that barrier away. And then at Central, and Chrissy will talk about this a little bit at one of our high schools, they have great resources, and Chrissy is one of them, and they have an MTSS team. They also have Gear Up and Dream Team, all sorts of other supports. There's a COSY grant that we have, and what they've done this year is bring them all together, literally into the same room, so that they could work together and share ideas together. They were running alongside each other, but not necessarily recognizing that they were going after the same goals. And so just by changing the environment of placing them face to face, not just in a shared suite, but literally in the same room together. So that's one advantage of having limited spaces. You get close to each other. So those have been the things that we've been rolling out. And what we just literally did yesterday was our first district-wide transition team meeting, where all of our 5th grade students rolling up to 6th grade, and then all of our 8th graders rolling into 9th grade. We brought our 26 schools together and had one-on-one student discussions for the incoming students to that next grade level. And it was our MTSS lead counselors that did the big lift to get that organized, creating in advance and sharing what we call one-pagers on each of the students, so that when they met with the receiving school, they were able to articulate the strengths of the student and then what supports were effective in the former school that they would be recommending in that transition year. So that was the first time that we had the opportunity to do that. And this work comes out of our opportunity to participate in the School Counselor Core Grant.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. It was very, very helpful. So the next question we have is for Christina. So what types of support are the school counselors providing to the students? I know Rhonda spoke a little bit about it in the previous question, but you can kind of tell us since you're actually working with the students. And then also, what are some of the challenges that school counselors face, and how do they address them?
Yeah, well, to start, as Rhonda mentioned, with MTSS, we have our referral system. So through that, teachers or any staff can fill out a form to let us know what concerns they have about the student. And then from there, we can see what supports they need from their school counselors. We also have our MTSS team, which I meet with every other week to discuss specific students. So we have teachers from every department and special education, sometimes administrators and the counselor, of course, to discuss those students and come up with some ideas for how to help them. And we also do crisis response. So every counselor has a day where they don't have any appointments. It's just only walk-ins for the students. So we work with them one-on-one, just on that individual level to help them process things that are going on. As far as school and community, family resources, we have lots of different things that we offer for our students to reach out to them. And we always have academic and post-secondary readiness conversations with all of our students. We have a looping system, so sophomores, juniors, and seniors will have the same counselor throughout until they graduate. And then our freshmen have a consistent counselor who's always receiving the incoming freshmen. And so with that, the transitions program, when we're discussing with the middle schools what they would like support for those students, we automatically compare them up with that freshman counselor coming in so that we can address their needs right away. In terms of some challenges that we face, I would say the counselor to student ratio. So before the grant, I mean, it was 350 plus students to one counselor, which is quite a lot. So with the help of the grant, we are working on just making sure that we're getting the needs met of all of our students. And so basically, because I'm just starting out and I'm trying to figure out how MTSS is working, it's a work in progress. But we do implement lesson plans across multiple students. Sometimes we do counseling in groups, of course, and we work with lots of different programs. As Rhonda mentioned, there are lots of grants, and so to tap into the needs of those specific students, maybe they need tutoring, then we would contact Gear Up, etc. And then we just communicate amongst all staff members, trying to get them in the loop so that they know what we're up to. And another challenge that we face is just outside factors that contribute to the student's success. So, home life situations, maybe the community that they're living with. It can be difficult for us to tap into those struggles that they're facing. So it's always important for us to be communicating with community agencies and to make sure we're doing home visits, calling home, getting the parents to come in, etc. And I'd say the last thing is that our current system is a bit reactive. So when we get caught up in scheduling or registrar duties, sometimes our students can fall behind in that list of things to do. So we want to make sure that we're also tackling their personal, social, and academic needs. So we do meet as a team every week. The counselors always meet every week. And then I also host meetings with the counselors for MTSS specific work. We talk about prevention, also using that referral system, bringing up certain students and identifying patterns so that we can prevent issues from coming up later on.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that information with us. And so we have one more question that we want to pose, and this will be to Eve. What type of data can you share with us about the success of this program in Colorado?
So as you see the slide below, this is Colorado, obviously, and that's a school district map. So the blue districts are the ones that we are currently funding. They're in year one, so they're in that development year where they only got about 30 or 50,000 to do all the work. The yellows are ones that we've funded. So of the 178 districts, you can see that we've had impact geographically across the state. So if you look at that, and then we look at the next slide, this is some of the milestones that I would like to share with you of what school counseling can really bring to the caring relationship with students and their success. So over the 9-year history, the grant program's been in 365 secondary schools, and of course, you saw the map of the 98 of the 178 districts, so all regions of Colorado. One thing that we like to mention is that 270 licensed counselors have served Colorado students, both at the district and BOCES through this grant. And again, this is over the 9-year history of the grant. They fund not only the additional opportunities to have school counselors in the buildings, but attending career fairs, visiting colleges and university campuses across the state. And some of our border districts will go to out-of-state schools because they're actually closer, but we do encourage that in-state campus visits to expose students that normally wouldn't have the opportunity to see these schools, that they would have the opportunity to attend and maybe get them excited about some post-secondary options. And so again, the average school counselor core grant funded program counselor ratio is well below the ASCA standard that is recommended of 250 to 1 that Chrissy mentioned. And so that's something, again, that we recognize as valuable to student success. And again, it comes right back to that caring adult.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much to the Colorado panelists for talking about this great program and how they're increasing caring adults in their schools. We definitely appreciate the opportunity to hear how your state has and will continue to increase caring adults in schools. Also want to give a huge thank you to Michael, Shannon, and Alexis for their presentations at the first part of the webinar. It was very insightful, and we're so happy to hear that there's so many people who are dedicating their work to increasing caring adults, because as we can see, it's very important for a student's success. So with that in mind, we are now going to switch over to the questions and answers portion of the webinar, and these are questions from our audience members. So they're going to be open to all the presenters today. And if you feel as though that you can answer the question best, just jump on in and answer it for us. So the first question that we're going to start with is, are the Colorado schools also looking at whether the students who have graduated and gone on to further their college or university training are staying in school? Recent reports demonstrate keeping high need youth in college and university settings.
I think I'll take that one. Our data here with the Department of Higher Ed is a little behind. However, we do look at the matriculation and sustainability, but the staying power of students, it's, again, hard for us to determine some of that for our out-of-state schools, but we are looking at it, but with nothing permanent or any real solid data to be able to share.
If I could also add that we use the National Student Clearinghouse data, and we carefully look at our persistence data. And then we have, actually it's at Central, through the COSI grant, a advisor who stays with our students after graduation into their first, over summer melt, and then into their first year, to still be that side-by-side support, making sure that they're getting access to any supports that they might need in their new environment. Because that's, we're trying to figure out ways that we can do what I call warm handoff to the higher ed. So with our university that we work with, as well as our community college, they are in the process of further building structures to figure out how to reach that hand we're extending to them.
Okay, perfect. Does any of our other presenters have anything to add? Michael, Shannon, Alexis? Oh, okay. So we can move to the next question. So this is a question for Rhonda. As an administrator, how would you recommend delivering this important information to staff, such as like professional development counselors or coaches, teachers, in order for them to have positive interactions with the students?
So the structure that we have here, I get to lead what's called the Graduates Initiative, and it's made up of most of the time, high school principals and a lead counselor. And then as appropriate, we also have our middle school principals and middle school counselors who join. And, you know, I'm kind of direct, and we are very clear about what our goals are. And we have a strategic goal that by the class of 2021, our current freshmen, that we will be at a 90% on-time graduation rate, and that our students will be both career and college ready. And from that, we have a very specific dropout goal, as well as a post-secondary enrollment goal. And so it's one thing to have, you know, those very clear goals. That's straightforward. The more challenging work then is what this question is asking, is how do you bring all those folks together and share, you know, how you're going to roll this out in the building. And my philosophy is every one building is going to be unique. And I used to be a high school principal, so I very much understand that. And at the same time, I also appreciated having clear goals at the district level, and then having the autonomy in my own building with a supportive collaborative network of other principals and counselors to design it for my school. And so I shared earlier that one of the things I do to support the schools is I meet with the MTSS lead counselors monthly, specifically about their MTSS work and the rollout and what obstacles they might be seeing and what celebrations they're seeing, so that we can just learn as a team. And then in my role, I also work directly with the principals, and you know, I do talk a lot about data, but those data points, those are students. And you know, I do like to look at the data, because I know that in the system, if you're decreasing the dropout rate, like as we did last year, from 3.4 to 2.3%, that is literally 111 less dropouts. So those numbers make a lot of sense to me, and you have to be in front of it. You just keep having that same charge, that same, you're the champion for it, And then you have these amazing counselors that you work with, who you specifically have hired, like Chrissy, who becomes the champion in their building. And they have a big charge, because getting MTSS successfully off the ground is difficult to do. I tried doing it in my former building as a high school principal with the current staffing, and it was a challenge. So having the support of the School Counselor Core Grant to be able to hire a counselor specifically for this work has made us a huge difference in being successful. And then I have the counselors then who lead it in their own building. So it's not district coming in and leading it in their building, or their own admin leading it. It is, she's like a great extension of those conversations that we have each month.
Okay, thank you, Rhonda, for that. So we're winding down on time, so we're going to try to get to 2 more questions. And so the first question that we have is so Shannon, you spoke about the importance of parents in creating this web of support for students and how important their role is. Have you seen examples of mentor counselor trainings intentionally engaging parents and getting to know them? Or has any of our other panelists seen any trainings intentionally engaging parents?
That's a really great question. Since I don't actually study formal mentoring settings, in my research, I don't currently, on the top of my head, know of any specific mentoring programs that have curriculum that engage parents. But I know that a lot of the assumptions coming in for many new mentors is that they're going to be the only adult in this young person's life. And so we're just trying to move away from that specific assumption.
I have an answer to that question. Working for a Wyoming Leadership Program, we try to, every summer with our older teens, give them access and give them ideas about post-secondary education options. So when we're wrapping them up and getting them ready to go on these college tours, their parents come drop them off. And when their parents come drop them off, they stay and engage in a session in which the parents now understand what they're doing over the summer with us. They understand that they're going to be filling out their FAFSA. They understand they're going to be applying for scholarships into college. And in most areas with economically disadvantaged youth, the parents have no idea what those things are. They don't know what a FAFSA is. They don't know how to apply for college. And so when those teens are getting dropped off, we make sure that the parents stay and that they become educated as well to become, a support system alongside their counselors and mentors too.
If I can piggyback,
go ahead.
I just want to piggyback off of that on the college planning. So with our partnership with the University of Northern Colorado, they have an outreach department, and from that outreach department, they've provided what are called college access coaches to 3 of our comprehensive high schools. And so they come alongside our students and their families and help them fill out the FAFSA form. Plus in Weld County, where we are, our community has what's called the Bright Futures Scholarship. So if you're a graduate, you receive a $2,000 scholarship because you are a resident here to put towards either a 2- or 4-year institution or a different type of post-secondary institution. And Bright Futures holds family engagement meetings and walks parents through, how Bright Futures will pay for X amount. Here's how you get the rest of it through the FAFSA form. And then our city of Greeley hosts what is, in cooperation with Ames Community College and UNC, College Goal Sunday. So it's literally a huge kind of convention center, and hundreds of our students, our seniors and their parents are there, and they get side-by-side support right there. They complete their entire FAFSA form. And so that takes a lot off of every individual counselor at their high schools trying to complete on their own all those different FAFSA forms for students and their families. And so I say all that just to say that to parallel what was shared earlier, that in this web, we have to make sure that we access our internal agents that we have, but also our external partners. And more times than not, it's just reaching out and having a conversation and sharing, hey, this is what we're working on. Does this align with what you'd like to do? And they will help. we have an amazing city and community college and university. And I'm thinking that across the nation, there are a lot of good helpers out there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for those great answers. One last question, and this one is for Michael. And so it's kind of like a two-part question, but who do you think is best equipped to identify supportive adults and insert them into communities? And then secondly, is like, what are some of the challenges that site coordinators might face trying to create these relationships with their students?
So let's see. Starting with that first question first, I think the way we approach our work is we're a catalyst, and we have that process. So we get to our site coordinators in a school get to be site coordinators in the school, identifying these relationships and identifying these needs. But they are the ones convening others in a school and working with them. So I guess my answer is everyone is critical to helping understand sort of what webs of relationships students have and identifying and inserting where additional partners and programs can be. I don't think there's a silver bullet or a sort of perfect role for that. You know, we take one approach with site coordinators, but any school with different, like we said earlier, MTSS systems or anything like that, will naturally find that. It's really just about intentionally getting everyone on the same page. And I think your second question was about challenges that our site coordinators run into, but I forget sort of in what context.
It would just be like, what are like maybe like two challenges of like how when they're trying to go about creating these relationships with the students, since that's like a big piece of their work. Like, what challenges do they run into? It doesn't have to be like extensive, because I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, and I think, you know, two elements of that. One would just be time with students. I think our site coordinators, with their background in care, would love to spend more time with students, and more often than not, they catch them on their way into school, in between classes, at lunch, and then maybe after school, depending on transportation issues. So that loads up a lot of other challenges that students run in. But academic time is important, and our site coordinators are very sort of sensitive and respectful of that time. And then the second piece is really what the panel discussed earlier, which is working with parents. And you know, I didn't answer earlier about training parents, but it's more about orienting them and just making sure they're aware of what is or isn't going on in their students' lives. That kind of awareness goes a long way of getting feedback and empowering a whole family or or the student to sort of find the necessary supports for themselves.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for those great answers to the questions. But that is all we have time for today. But I just wanted to thank all of our presenters once again for a great presentation on caring adult relationships and the important role it plays in helping us make sure our students are on track for success. We hope our attendees took a lot from what we shared today and sincerely appreciate the time you invested. For more information about the Gradnation campaign, please visit our website, which is shown on the screen. And to access the tools and resources that was mentioned throughout the webinar, you can visit their websites, which are also on the screen. And lastly, if you had any questions that we did not get to, or you come up with some after the fact, you can definitely email us at gradnation90@americaspromise.org. Again, that's gradnation90@americaspromise.org. And last, to join the conversation on social media, please use #GradNation. Again, thank you for your time.